The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. Good morning. It is Friday, January 9th, 2026. We are back from holiday hiatus, 9 days into the new year, and I'm still writing 2025 on everything. But our panel, I'm confident, has their thoughts together this morning. Our rundowners this week: Paul Tudhill, reporter emeritus; Elizabeth Roman, executive editor for NEPM News; and Mike Dobbs of Focus Springfield. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Thank you. If you at home have thoughts, email the rundown at nepm.org. That's the rundown at nepm.org. Coming up on the show, our panel's thoughts on a solar field in Southampton and how that plan could have impacts beyond that small community, and a new year and a mix of new and incumbent leaders being installed across the 413 in city and town governments. We'll take a closer look at that. But first, the big news of the week nationally and locally too, reaction to the U.S. raid in Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro served as president of Venezuela for more than 10 years before a United States military operation on Saturday captured and brought him to America to face narco-terrorism charges. Maduro, his wife, and others were seized by Army Delta Force commandos on Saturday and brought, as I said, to the United States. The New York Times reported that Maduro pleaded not guilty to federal charges and said he was kidnapped and declared himself, quote, a prisoner of war. Here in the 413, we saw reaction to President Trump's move was mixed. Some protesters who hit the streets discussed this as an overreach of power. Others agreed with it. Berkshire Eagle's Mitchell Chapman and Izzy Breyer spoke with Carlina Velasquez, president of the nonprofit Venezuelan Association of Massachusetts, who said she was thankful for Maduro's removal. Quote, "We've been waiting for this moment for 25 years, and this is the only administration that has been taking action. People are leaving the country because of a humanitarian crisis, and no one in the world has done anything about it now except for President Trump." Paul Tudhill, I'll start with you. Thoughts on this news?
Well, I guess the question now is what comes next in Venezuela, and it seems to be a lot of confusion over that. Trump, when they announced this action to remove Maduro, said that the United States was going to run Venezuela.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Maduro's vice president took over the governance there. Things seem to be functioning in Venezuela with whatever form of government they have in place there. And I'm not aware that the U.S. has people on the ground in Venezuela actually taking charge of things like the trains and the planes and the water and everything else that you need to make a society function with the infrastructure. So it's apparently the plan, as I can parse it from the public statements that Trump has made in this interview that he gave earlier this week to the New York Times. Mm-hmm. Apparently the plan is we're going to run Venezuela by influencing them through our control of their oil. But
I think that's a decent summation, but go ahead.
But in order to do that, we have to get private oil companies interested in going to Venezuela. So the question is going to be, are they going to be interested in going to Venezuela, investing the billions of dollars needed to revitalize the oil infrastructure there, with the possibility that if Trump's out of office in 3 years, the whole situation could change?
And to your point, President Trump is meeting with those leaders of the oil companies today. I heard on NPR this morning that many of those companies, I think Chevron is the only one in the game still in Venezuela. Most pulled out in 2007. We heard Senator Ed Markey bring up similar concerns to you, Paul, just talking about the removal of leadership from Venezuela and what it might do to destabilize the country. He's concerned that it risks, quote, his quote, risks another endless war. Mike Dobbs, what are you thinking?
Well, what I'm thinking is that there is no logic, there is no sense in any of this. I was listening to NEPM on the way in, and there was
We appreciate that.
there was this report about, we've heard now that Trump is going to go after Colombia and going to go after Mexico, and Stephen Miller has been on the various networks talking about the revival of the Monroe Doctrine, and that law isn't important, but what is important is power and military might to fulfill a mission. And it's like, but then NEPM reported that he's rattling his sword against Colombia, but he took a call from the Colombian president, and afterwards he was all, hey, this was good. This was good. So it's like, it is truly a what the word that I can't use on National Public Radio is going on here. He makes an announcement about aggression, and now he's dialing it back because he had a decent phone call with this guy, and he has just spent the last couple of weeks saying what a terrible narco criminal this guy is in Colombia. I cannot imagine what our European allies are thinking about all of this. I cannot imagine trying to run the United States on this whim. Am I in a good mood today? Well, I got a real nice phone call from someone I've been talking crap about. Yeah, I'm in a good mood, but what's tomorrow going to bring?
Mike Dobbs, you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, and Elizabeth Roman, NEPM reporter Phil Bishop, spoke with Kevin Young, a UMass Amherst professor, about that doctrine, unpacking it a little bit. What stood out to you and what Young told Phil Bishop?
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of people, well, I can only speak for me, but I went back to like my 8th and 9th grade civics and like social studies class, looking at this 200-year-old policy and how it's being used today. And he was talking to this professor about how it was used in Panama, how it was used in Cuba, how it was used in Nicaragua, all of these Latin American countries that, they're taking this policy from 200 years ago and using it to take power, take control now. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I also have found it interesting as a Latina woman, having on my social media feeds just, endless like Latino creators talking about this, and so many people are excited about it. They're optimistic and careful and wondering what Trump is going to do, but it's been interesting to see the perspective of news sources saying like, oh, like what authority does the U.S. have to do this? And then Venezuelans saying we don't care about the oil. We were desperate for somebody to do something.
Excited from the perspective of Maduro
being out. Right, yeah. Right. So it's been interesting to see like this old historical, what you would think is like a historical document in like living proof. Like,
And I'm in the camp with you, Liz. If I learned about this back in 8th grade, it was stored somewhere and completely forgotten about. And I do have to say, after having reading the doctrine myself this week, if you are looking for a drug-free sleep aid, go ahead and grab that Monroe Doctrine before you're trying to head to bed. You'll be asleep in moments.
Well, the Monroe Doctrine dates to what, 1823. Yeah. But the United States in the last century had a long history of intervention in Latin America, and some of it was political, fervent anti-communism, but a lot of it was economic. When the Dulles brothers were running the CIA and the State Department under Eisenhower, we intervened in Guatemala over fruit that had been fruit plantations that had been nationalized.
Yeah, or in Panama over the canal as well.
Yeah. I want to bring in UMass professor Kevin Young here. Here's a bit more of what he told to Phil Bishop, just kind of putting this in broader context.
It's been a long time since U.S. officials articulated their economic motivations with such clarity and candor, so openly, so publicly. Usually you have to go into the classified records, the declassified documents, to see them speaking with such candor about the desire to control overseas resources and markets. Now they're just really saying it upfront, explicitly, unabashedly.
So listen, I can hear President Trump saying, look, I'm being transparent. Would you prefer that I operate under the cover of darkness, which our leadership often does? So I could just see that happening. In the light of day, here we are.
Well, and plus we set this thing up with Maduro with all of these boat strikes on supposed drug smugglers
traffickers.
that were coming out of Venezuela, and then we had the embargo with the Ford, the aircraft carrier that we moved over from the Mediterranean, so that we could keep oil tankers from leaving the country. And so, I mean, yeah, we should have expected that this would be the next step, that they would go in and snatch Maduro and now try to take over the oil business.
Well, certainly next steps here closer to home. Some residents do plan to take to the streets and protest this weekend. At least one report, there's going to be out of Pittsfield a No War in Venezuela standout tomorrow at 1 p.m. All right, moving on. Sam Ferland, Daily Hampshire Gazette. The headline, Southampton residents debate solar future of local farmland. Quoting here, more than 50 residents crammed into a town hall meeting room Monday night to sound off on a proposed solar array and battery energy storage system, also known as BESS, on farmland off of Pleasant Street, and that's near the Barnes Aquifer. It's the latest in a number of solar developments being floated in communities throughout the region in recent months. The Conservation Commission heard public comments, and they ranged from those who were firmly against the project to others who sought answers to clarifying questions. And, from those comments, several main concerns were discussed: the safety of wetlands and a turtle habitat, the safety of the Barnes Aquifer, and overall impacts from solar batteries. Mike, you've covered a municipal meeting or two in your time. The Con, drawing 50 people. I mean, most times it's the commission itself and maybe a reporter. What do you think?
I think that as we move forward, this reminds me of the whole Carvana/Southwick issue a few years ago about smaller towns, on one hand, seeking development that makes sense for them, that economically and lifestyle-wise, and then on the other side, is this economic development actually going to hurt them? I think that most people seeing a field that's not being used for anything, having a solar array there, is a good thing. Certainly in Springfield, there was all sorts of property near the former Chapman Valve in Indian Orchard that they could not sell, that they could not redevelop as housing. So they put a big solar array there. That makes sense. I don't think people generally have issues about that. What they do have issues with is when you've got facilities with lithium batteries that have been proven to be somewhat problematic at times. And especially
there's a risk of fire, and the result is basically let that burn out.
And it's also, especially since we're now talking about clean water, which is both the wetlands and what the Barnes Aquifer refer to. I can understand their concerns, and I think that as we move forward, we're going to see more of these kinds of facilities being challenged in this century than they were in the last century.
And a little bit of detail about the project. Blue Wave Solar out of Boston is proposing it. It would be a 5.49 megawatt solar array. The project would encompass about 40 acres of what is currently 130 acres of largely farmland right now. It's privately owned, and about 10,000 panels. And like I said, it's currently hay and cornfields. Fleetwood Environmental Solutions said at the meeting that there's about 7 square feet that would encompass the riverfront area. So if we're looking at, encroachment on that water resource. For me, though, I took a look at the Barnes Aquifer. I did not realize that it supplies 1.2 billion gallons of water per year to 60,000 people in Southampton, East Hampton, Holyoke, and Westfield. So we're talking about, Southampton, a population of about 6,200 people, but potentially a larger impact here. Paul Todd Hill, what's on your mind?
Well, I think, again, the issue I don't think is the solar panels, because as Mike pointed out, we see those everywhere. And people put them on the roofs of their houses. And,
we have solar at our house.
And those, it's the battery storage. That's what that's what the concern is here. And the same concerns have been raised in the town of Blandford, where several projects have been proposed there, and the town has now put a moratorium on these until they can sort through these issues and try to figure out what the best course of action is.
It's certainly an issue that they'll be looking at the pros and cons there in Southampton. The Conservation Commission is scheduled to meet in February. Unclear right now if this issue will come up again there, but it's a story that we'll definitely continue to keep you informed about here on the Rundown as we head to a quick break. Still ahead, with a slate of elected officials being sworn into office after November's elections, we'll examine history being made in at least 2 of those municipalities. Stay with us for more on the Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo, joined by journalists Paul Tudhill, Mike Dobbs, and Elizabeth Roman. All right, let's move to news that affected all of Western Massachusetts this week. Across Western Massachusetts, elected officials are elected in November were sworn into office. NEPM's Nirvani Williams took a look at this, and she reported it, saying that mayors, city and town councilors, school committee members, and others were sworn into office. Let's start with Western Mass's largest city, Springfield. Jeanette DeForge called it this way. The Springfield Republican newspaper reporter, quote, in an historic inauguration day, the city council elected its first black woman as president Monday, and a school committee with a supermajority of women and people of color was sworn in. Liz, you grew up in Springfield, now a majority minority city. What are you thinking when you're watching this history unfold?
It's exciting. I mean, Tracy's been around for quite a long time, so she's not new to this game.
Tracy Whitfield, who was installed
yes.
as the president of Springfield City Council.
So that's super exciting. I mean, I think a woman being in that position is not that common either. I'm not sure when the last time it was that a woman was the president, but I thought it was a really nice touch that she had Chief of Police Larry Akers come up and speak, who's the first black Chief of Police in the city, and then also the Superintendent of Schools, Sonia Denal, first woman of color to serve in that position as well. So it felt like a really monumental moment that was shared between them. And then I'll also just shout out Jose Delgado, who was elected as the vice president of the council. He's very well respected in the Puerto Rican community. Over the summer, he was picked as the godfather of the Puerto Rican parade. His wife is a principal at Brightwood. So he's really, really well liked. He gets the votes. And so it'll be interesting to see what the two of them do together.
You mentioned Tracy Whitfield, newly installed president. She has new initiatives, and she's not been shy about them. Right out of the gate, 4 special committees she intends to make: fiscal accountability and budget review, procurement review and transparency, residential development, as well as revenue and economic growth. These might sound like sleepy issues, but clearly imperative to what's going on in the city of Springfield.
It's interesting the way the council presidency has evolved in Springfield. It was once, almost purely a ceremonial office that was handed back and forth and traded back and forth by the various councilors. But largely through the creation of these ad hoc committees where membership is controlled by the council president and will often include unelected people. The council presidents have sought a greater role in shaping public policy, and that's what Whitfield is attempting to do here with the creation of these ad hoc committees that you just mentioned. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, how the dynamic plays out with the Sarno administration. Whitfield, we know, has been a frequent critic of the Sarno administration, and so the next year going forward will be something to follow as always.
And I think Justin Hurst is back as well.
That's right.
Which they've been contentious with each other, but they've also supported each other in a lot of things too.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of dramatic change in the city council. There's 2 new members coming on. One is Justin Hurst returning to the council after a 2-year hiatus
and failed run for mayor.
And then the failed run for mayor, and the other is Jerry Martin, who's taking over as the representative from Council Ward 7.
Yeah, and Whitfield also announced that she's creating a training course for new and aspiring city councils in partnership with UMass Amherst, so it will be interesting to watch that too. Let's take a look at Holyoke, also made history there. Daily Hampshire Gazette Samuel Agelinas reporting, women hold a majority of seats in the council's chambers, and after multiple years of discussion about having a vice president for the city council, Israel Rivera was tapped for that post, and Tessa Marie Ramboletti will hold the presidency. The Springfield Republican reporter April May Munford asked Murphy Ramboletti about the turbid times as of late in the city council there. It's probably putting it mildly. Murphy Ramboletti said that recent disagreements in the council were not the problem. It was how councilors treat each other, Mike, during these moments that is going to matter.
I have to say, I in the past I have covered the Holyoke City Council, and it was always a frustrating / amusing experience. Not to denigrate Holyoke, which is a community that I truly love, having worked there a great deal. I have to say that the council had the reputation for being one of the personally dysfunctional councils here in Hampden County. I think it's great if they can get their act together, because the council needs to put Mayor Garcia in check and also work with Mayor Garcia. And I think they were getting really sidetracked in their in personal stuff that they shouldn't really get sidetracked by.
You mentioned Mayor Garcia. He ran unopposed, but he addressed the city's next steps. He intends to continue the course to correct city finances. This after we saw in October that the state froze local aid payments because the city basically hadn't filed routine paperwork. He also plans to focus on blight, housing, and strengthening the community response working with Economic Development Director Eric Nakajima, who's new to that role. Meanwhile, 7 incumbents on the Holyoke School Committee ran unopposed, and they're returning. So that's the shape of play in Holyoke. Paul, any thoughts?
Well, Mayor Garcia, as you mentioned, ran unopposed for re-election last year, and he worked to get some allies elected to the Holyoke City Council. Now we'll see how that dynamic works and if those allies come through for him to deliver on his priorities.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting to note too that Israel Rivera was voted into this vice president spot, while April also wrote about his DUI arrest that happened in December, and the fact that he got 8 votes for it, so overwhelming majority. The people seem to trust him. He's addressed it and said he wants to move forward and is accountable for what he did. But I'm curious to see if that comes into play down the line. I know April also did some reporting on an ethics commission with the police unions, looking at whether he should be on like a public safety committee, with his pending case. So I'm curious to see how that's all going to turn out.
And Holyoke has dealt with DUIs amongst board members in the past. David Bartley dealt with that issue as well, and certainly held power for quite some time there in that city. So Holyoke looking to help people rise up after they've had issues with the law, perhaps. Brief mention here in Pittsfield, Earl Persip III was elected city council president, Pete White as vice president. Mayor Pete Marchetti there intends to kind of mark his accomplishments for 2025, saying, economic growth was a big thing from the city for 2025. They saw 14 new businesses and major infrastructure improvements that smoothed out tens of miles in city roads. And he outlined continued investment in affordable and supporting housing. Certainly something we're going to see across Western Massachusetts is that bolstering of housing. All right, I'm going to have us take a look at what we think will be a big impact story here in 2026. We have turned the page on a new year, and I just want to get the panel's thoughts. Paul Tothill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to go with healthcare, specifically the health of the region's top hospitals, Bay State and Mercy. Both raised red flags last year. Mercy, as we know, pulled back in some areas of service, maternity care being one. Bay State cut some jobs and also announced a new strategic plan. Now, this year, as a result of the federal changes, fewer people are expected to be eligible for insurance coverage through Medicaid, which operates as Mass Health. Just yesterday, Governor Healy announced an additional $250 million to subsidize premiums in the connector care insurance marketplace. That signals to me that enrollment there is lagging. And of course, the more uninsured people you have, the greater pressure there is going to be on these hospitals to provide care as a last resort to people who can't pay for it.
Well, and to your point about the perhaps lagging enrollment, people dropped health care when we came into January because premiums, they doubled and tripled for some people, given that the Affordable Care Act, Congress has been fighting about whether to extend those subsidies. We saw the House make that move. Whether the Senate does the same, we'll see. And then whether the president signs that, he's been very opposed to that idea. It's part of how we got here. If people want to hear more about healthcare, they can go back and listen to our last show of 2025. We really unpacked some of the impacts that President Peter Banco talked about, the impacts that they might see at Bay State. So give a listen to the December 19th show, The Rundown, nepm.org/The Rundown. Mike Dobbs, what about you? Big impact story for 2026?
I just got my bill from Eversource.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now, according to public radio colleagues station WBUR, their report was that Massachusetts is now the third most expensive energy state. Only Hawaii and California have higher rates. At the same time, we're seeing stories about how more and more people, especially younger people, they get out of college, they look around and they say, I'm not going to stay here. So our energy costs are impacting business, residential customers. It's impacting like future economic development in the state and the retention of businesses, much less trying to attract new businesses here. And I know the Healy administration and the legislature has done a few things. I'm here just to say, if you don't do more things, this is going to be a huge issue for all of your re-elections. People cannot afford this stuff. And, you know, with Paul talking about the impact on healthcare, it's like healthcare, energy, how are you going to take care of yourself, how are you going to heat your home. These are what I call street issues. This is your electric bill, your gas bill are things that everybody has got to face. And granted, some communities in our listening area have municipal run utilities, which is great. Generally, those have tracked at less expensive, but the largest city in Western Massachusetts does not. And so for any of us, these are real issues that I think the Healy administration and the legislature have really got to get off their backsides and address very aggressively, because it's going to be a line of dominoes. And if energy prices are really going to affect business, that affects jobs, and you know how that works.
Well, and it is also interesting that and troubling that these rise in costs in electricity that we're seeing are coming at the same time that the state is pushing people to use greener energy. They had a push, and we saw Boston push back on it, to remove gas from being used as a heating source in buildings. There was going to be an outright ban on doing that, and saying, oh no, electric is all you can use for heating. And we saw that not come to fruition. But if the administration is saying, look, electricity is a cleaner form of heating, and we want to see that in more buildings, but at the same time, it is astronomical to run electricity as heat, those two ends are not going to meet, right?
And no business would move into Boston, if a new business, with those restrictions. Let's face it.
Which is, I think, why we saw the city of Boston not move forward with that.
No.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, electricity is the future. It's how it's generated is the question, and also how it's delivered to you is the question. And a lot of what's driving the increase in these bills right now is the utilities trying to rebuild their infrastructure and construct new infrastructure. I mean, you've got poles and lines and et cetera out there that are 50 years old.
Older.
And this stuff has to be replaced. What's kind of bizarre about this is that through our utility bills, we're paying for future power sources, clean energy power sources, but we're also paying for this infrastructure, some of which we may or may not need in the future. That's particularly on the gas side. I mean, I look at my gas bill, and the supply charge is minuscule compared to everything else that's on there, including the clean energy stuff, which is what the state mandates, and the infrastructure repairs, which is what the gas company wants.
Yeah. Liz Ramon, how about for you? Big impact story of 2026.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to look at immigration, particularly, I mean, with the Minneapolis case and the ICE shooting that happened recently. It's on a national scale again, but Nirvani Williams, who's our race and equity reporter, has made a ton of contacts with our New England News Collaborative. They're working on maps showcasing, where ICE is infiltrating in our area, how it's affecting Western Mass communities, and also reaction from community members and what they're doing to, to stand their ground and say that they don't want ICE in their communities. So perspective of federal officials, which we never get because they never answer our calls, but certainly reactions from the community and from the immigrant community here as well.
And obviously, we'll keep looking for those responses from those officials. If people want to check out that reporting, nepm.org has it up.
Yes.
All right. We talked about 3 serious stories. I'm going to take us on a softer look here for an impact story in 2026. We saw students from the Hadley region making a push to make asparagus our state vegetable.
Ugh.
Say use to Hadley grass. I mean, can't you see the bumper stickers? Massachusetts, our pee smells terrible. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. My thanks to Paul Tedhill, Mike Dobbs, and Elizabeth Roman. Have a great day, everybody.